I have 11 o'clock Eastern. I think most people are in. If you're just joining us, welcome. My name is Katie Nichols. I am a SANS instructor as well as Director of Intelligence for Red Canary, and this is the SANS Threat Analysis Rundown webcast. I'm joined today by Andy Piazza, who's going to be speaking in just a moment. He's going to be talking about a challenge for a lot of CTI teams and threat analysts and SOCs overall is how do we quantify threat actors? So that will be what Andy is diving into today. First things first, yes, this is being recorded, and yes, the slides will be available afterwards on the same page where you joined from. So, all right, we got that out of the way. If you do have questions about anything at all, feel free to use that Q&A section of Zoom, and we are happy to answer your questions. We've got some time at the end where Andy and I are just going to chat all things threat frameworks and models. So if you have questions, feel free to drop those into the Zoom. If you're not familiar, SANS the STAR Webcast rather, is a monthly webcast. Our goal is to bring you a bunch of different voices, people who are smart about all things threat related. Check out, if you haven't, check out some of our previous webcasts. We've talked about deep dives on ransomware adversaries. We've talked about theoretical, conceptual stuff, everything from ICS to how you track trends. So definitely check out previous months if you haven't already. Agenda for today, if you're a regular STAR viewer, pretty normal. I'm going to give you a rundown of a couple things going on in the news. Then I'll pass it to Andy to deep dive into our topic of the day. Then we'll wrap up. We'll have some questions, discussions, talk about thready threat things, and I'll send you away with some action items. Rundown, January 28th. I kind of had to double check the date because I can't believe January is almost over. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. So just a few things happening here in January, but some good news, right? For a change, we had some takedowns this week. I think we all were cheering a little bit with the huge Emotet takedown yesterday. If you haven't watched the video from law enforcement, I highly recommend that. I've seen some Zoom backgrounds already popping up of the office of the adversaries that were behind the Emotet botnet. Not super glamorous digs is what I'm going to say on that. But really excited about this takedown, international cooperation on this, which is super exciting. And remains to be seen. I know when the TrickBot takedown happened, people were sort of skeptical. Is it really going to impact because these botnets are really tough to take down? So we'll see. I'm hoping Emotet's going to fade off into the sunset, but we will see. And I just wanted to thank all of the amazing researchers who helped out with this, folks on Twitter like Cryptolamus and people who were tracking Emotet like every day, Sherrod from Proofpoint. So this was a big win for the community. So I'm hoping more stuff like that in 2021. Also on the good takedown news front, the operators of the Netwalker ransomware. There was legal action taken against one of them, a defendant charged, and then some takedowns of some of their infrastructure as well. So also good news, ransomware not going anywhere in 2021, but I don't know. My optimistic hope is that if we start to get more and more of these takedowns, especially maybe international ones, maybe it'll start to make this ransomware challenge a bit easier. Another maybe not as good news item that hit pretty close to home for some of us in the community. Google's threat analysis group published an awesome, really detailed blog. So thank you to Adam and the researchers at TAG on this one. Some North Korean actors decided to target security researchers under the guise of, collaborating on vulnerability codes. So yeah, it was kind of a wake-up call that what we do in this community has some risk, and this is a thing. And I know I can be guilty sometimes of trusting people a little too much because I want to collaborate, but definitely gave me pause, as it should probably all of us, for maybe don't click on that random Twitter link of someone that you don't know and can't validate. So same advice that we kind of give to all of our users. Maybe we need to eat our own dog food on that one. So that was a pretty interesting one, but appreciate Google sharing that and got that out so quickly. This happened in January, if you checked out the dates. And so appreciate them sharing that with us. And last, of course, I have to mention Solarwinds Compromise, all of the many adversary names behind this. Yeah, Andy and I were chatting before this and we're like, at least the SolarWinds stuff has died down, but it just keeps coming, right? Last Friday, or 2 Fridays ago, time is meaningless. Microsoft had a good follow-up blog post. There have been a few follow-up reports, just kind of getting more details on what has happened. So the way I'm treating this, and I'd recommend everyone kind of thinks about it, is we're sort of out of the hair on fire, but you still got to pay attention, right? There's a lot of great stuff coming out. FireEye actually shared a bunch of good advice on securing Office 365 environments. So make sure when these reports are coming out, you take a look. Like, don't panic, but all of these are good opportunities for all of us to think about improving our detection. That's what we all do. All right, so just a few things going down, and I have links to all of these in the references, so you can check out those and definitely watch that Emotet takedown video if you haven't already. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Andy. So my pleasure to introduce Andy Piazza. He's at phia right now. You should follow him on Twitter. He's one of the threat intel people that I trust in this community. We regularly like to nerd out over Twitter on attribution or threat modeling and all of those fun things. He has like 1 billion SANS certs. And so happy to pass it off to Andy.
Hey, thanks, Katie. All right, let's see if I can still have control.
Success.
Well, we do, and I'm just going to jump a bunch of slides while I try. Yeah, so I'm Andy Piazza. I'm Killer Grizz on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm the chief evangelist for phia here in Northern Virginia area. I'm also a cyber threat analyst during the day. I do have a whole bunch of SANS certs. That's mostly because I'm in the SANS Masters program. Happy to chat with folks offline about that. Highly recommend it. It's been really cool. Part of that program was actually writing this paper on quantifying threat actor assessments, so I could earn my GCTI Gold cert there. It's been a really good experience throughout the whole program, and it's really helped me deep dive into my own research, some things I've done for clients and for just some side projects. So I really do highly recommend the program. And yeah, so here's some of my analysis. So the first thing we talk about, right, is what is this gap, right? We have this gap in current methodologies when it comes to assessing threat actors. I think the current models are really good for risk assessments for traditional risk models, or really good at breaking down what threat actors are capable of, what they're targeting, what their intentions are, right? How their malware works, their strategic goals. There's all of these great assessments of threat actors, and there's all these great assessments of risk, but there's no real model that kind of stacks threat actors in the same way that we stack risks. And so that was the first challenge. My CISO, my client, would walk by occasionally our area in the threat team and ask, who should I care about today? And it was like, how do we present that information better than just talking about one actor at a time? The human elements, how do we capture those human elements that the risk model just doesn't capture? So our challenge was, to develop a threat actor assessment methodology. How do we address, like I said, who do we care about? Who's targeting my enterprise? Is China more dangerous than Iran? Some of the questions you may get from executives. Maybe, there we go. So part of it, we really wanted to target that quantifying the human elements, and we wanted to show it had to be target centric. We wanted to specifically talk about an organization, and we wanted it to be something that was similar to what executives were already seeing, existing models. We didn't want to create a brand new model from scratch or a completely new visual from scratch and have a lot of confusion. We wanted this to be as acceptable as possible. And I should stop here and say I work with an amazing team and we put the original version together for our client. I've built on it for my research paper, so I'll talk about some of the analysis I did on my own, but really it was a really cool team effort from a bunch of folks that helped come up with the original idea. We'll get into how that kind of built up, but yeah, so we took the original risk model, kind of color scheme, traffic light colors that folks were used to seeing. We got the DoD risk model here down in the bottom left, and quick shot of what the threat box kind of built into here on the right. Again, it was trying to assess the human elements of intentions and capabilities, but then also stacking them against other actors' intentions and capabilities. So to apply the model, right, I can't just go around and show everybody the awesome model that we did for our clients. So I came up with 3, fictitious organizations. Hopefully they don't closely represent anybody, right? Names were changed to protect the innocent, kind of a thing. So we have an American oil company we'll call AMMO. They're a Texas-based oil company operating ICS manufacturing and operations in the United States and abroad, and specifically Saudi Arabia and the Middle East area. got a fictitious United States government financial organization, USGFO, or Washington, D.C. based. And the concept behind this organization is that they process any payments to and from United States governments for services. They're processing, all those payments. They've got all that financial data, PII. So that's, when we start talking about threat modeling, start talking about the targets and the organizations. These models have to be centric, focused on the actual target. And so that's why it's important to talk about where they operate and what kind of data they hold. And then last, we have the information technology company, ITCO. They're a California-based tech firm, offers multiple online services such as cloud computing, storage, and they sell some proprietary IT hardware, right? So they're storing other folks' data with the cloud computing, bunch of online services, customers, point of sale. That's the kind of enterprise, you can talk about or think about there. So we also, looking at the model, we came up with these 4 attack categories. Espionage, right, is specifically an attack impacting confidentiality of a data system. We also put intellectual property theft in there under espionage. We separate out stealing stuff for money, whether it's intellectual property theft, right, or cybercrime is, are they going to make a near-term profit? That's probably cybercrime, right? Are they running some kind of code or stealing money, hijacking funds? That's cybercrime. But if it's intellectual property, I'm going to steal your plans and then go make it myself and beat you to market. That's more espionage or corporate espionage, right? Destructive attacks, any attacks impacting the integrity of data systems, and then disruptive attacks availability. Really important breakout here too is ransomware, right? There is traditional cybercrime ransomware, and we normally will assess a threat report or campaign as cybercrime if it's, the doppelpayers, the folks that are trying to get paid, even if their decryption rates suck, right? And they're still destroying stuff. It could easily be argued that it's destructive malware. But really, this is trying to understand the threat actor's intentions of the malware, right? So we traditionally put the ransomware for money, true ransomware for money under cybercrime. The not PETIAs, the WannaCrys, and the truly destructive malwares, we put under destructive, even if it's the same capability, how the malware operates, or they were spoofing or faking to do ransomware notes, right? We find that out after the investigations and threat reporting. So that's where we kind of delineate the two between destructive and cybercrime. Yes, that can cause some arguments, especially early on in a campaign when you don't know what the final intentions are. But the great thing about your threat models and your threat assessments is they should adapt with new information. Never stick with the same assessment you had last month kind of a situation, right? As new data comes in, you can always update. So the first thing we wanted to calculate, right, was that we always talk about threat actors' intentions and capabilities. So for intention score, I came up with this idea of having a willingness modifier too, right? Because some organizations may really, really want data from, you're in the United States government intelligence community and you have really super secret intelligence. The UK may really, really, really want that, but are they really going to target us, or are they just going to ask nicely because they're our friends, right? So realizing when I built this model up for my research paper was that the willingness modifier was actually really important. Otherwise, you could have a bunch of friendlies on the chart. And there's some other modifiers, not just if we're friendly, but so we assess each actor for their intentions to carry out a specific type of attack. So there's those 4 categories. Every one of those categories for every actor we assess gets assessed for intention. Why would this actor target our organization with this specific type of attack? And the big thing here is I want to stress is make this assessment based on existing intelligence. I say existing intelligence at threat reporting, whether it's open source, commercial, government, if you have access. Don't make this assessment based off of what ifs and the Mr. Tinfoil hat, right? There are a lot of folks that could go, well, I could see China has all the money in the world. They could easily do this type of attack. Well, if they don't have a history of it, right? We're not doing whiteboard. I think for a threat modeling perspective, you can do your whiteboards, you can do your what if scenarios. This model is not for what ifing. If you what if it, you're going to be arguing with your team. Trust me, when we built this model out, we were arguing every day. That's a good point here. Don't ruin relationships arguing. A good CTI team should be able to challenge each other, call BS on each other's assessments, especially, if we can identify what those biases are, but still be able to walk down the hill and get some coffee afterwards, right? It's very important that you have a healthy debate, but everybody walks away as friends. Don't ruin each other's lives over assessments, okay? But yeah, so we look at existing threat intelligence. That's really, really critical. It keeps the model moving forward. It keeps you from sidetracking, and it keeps you from ruining relationships. And then again, a willingness modifier, right? What are some constraints that may impact this actor's intent? There could be legal, political, or economic dependencies. A big ugly chart. I know it's kind of scary here. This is, fill in the blanks with your actors and organization variables, but this is your score set from a 1, targeting intention for target of opportunity, all the way up to target specific data as a rating of 5. A couple of important ones here in between, right? Ideology and association. Your organization may get targeted because of ideology. If you're putting out a certain movie that pisses off a certain country, right? You could very easily take a threat actor who didn't care about you last month and escalate you up to a 4 or a 5 very quickly. So again, time-based, right? You want to continue to reassess these and think about how your organization's threat landscape has kind of changed because of the current times. Difference between sector and ideology. There is a government sector, right? So if you're a government agency, most of the APTs are U.S. government. You're probably getting targeted for espionage as a 3 right there, right away as an intent score. But you may also get targeted as USG for number 4 is ideology, is specifically associated with being a symbol of the United States government too. So that's something the threat analyst can debate and have a conversation with, depending on the threat actor. Not all threat actors go after symbology, some do specifically. So again, base it off of existing intelligence and what you know about those groups. There's a willingness modifier, so you could take a 5, right? They really, really want this data that only this organization has, but they've got strong diplomatic, economic, and security ties with the US. So that's, minus 2 points from that 5-point scale. So capabilities and novelty. Each actor, again, is assessed for their known capabilities by the attack type, those 4 categories. We're going to break them down and say, what evidence is available that this actor is capable of this type of attack? Again, defeating the Mr. Tinfoil. We don't want a bunch of what-if scenarios. We want to see what existing intelligence has about this actor's capability for these specific attack categories. And then the capability score is balanced by a novelty modifier, and it attempts to answer, what indication of advanced skills are evident. This was originally a really interesting conversation when we started talking about intentions and capabilities. We talked about the model being capabilities, trying to assess how advanced their malware was or how good they were at being silent. But the reality is threat actors do what they can get away with, right? Almost like teenagers. Sorry, threat actors, didn't mean to offend you there. But that's the reality is, threat actors are only going to deploy. They're not going to deploy like 9, chain 0 days if your front door's wide open. So assessing a threat actor because of their skill set and their code and stuff didn't seem really right. So I ended up working that in as a novelty modifier. And we'll see that here in the scores. We'll jump back to capability, but let's look at the novelty modifier first. Tool sets are generally available as a -2. The idea being you hopefully are investing in the right vendors, right, for your security, IDS, endpoints, network, all of those things. They're all bringing in threat intelligence as well. Hopefully the common malware has a pretty good signature out there in multiple of your tools. You've got, defense in depth for all of the common malware types, and your vendors are updating, your signatures and your IOCs regularly. So even if a threat actor is really, really capable but they're using something that's pretty well known, right? They're using Mimikatz regularly. Hopefully Mimikatz is pretty well known. We know what it can do. We know how some threat actors change it and deploy it. That could be a -1 or a -2 on the modifier. If you're a mature organization and you're leaning forward in your detection engineering and you've got a good relationship with your vendors and you've got good detection, defense in depth, you can -2 for some of the common tool sets, right? So that's how the modifier works. But looking back at the capability, top 5, right, number score is a significant capability. There is evidence that this actor uses this capability regularly. It's well documented. Multiple trusted sources say, China is really good at web shells. You could probably say that's a 5, right? All the way down to not capable at all. There's no reporting or possible capability. I think it is pretty common, right? There's very limited evidence of operational capability, but feasibly, we think they've done it. There's some association with an unattributed group that we believe might belong to this country or actor. So there's some room to wiggle there. And again, great place to have conversations as analysts. The idea is, hopefully you're not doing this as a single analyst making this assessment by yourself. You can get some really good conversations about it. So sourcing the model, right? And like I said, in my team, we had really good debates. There was about 5 or 6 of us involved over time in debating these scores, and that all takes different perspectives. That all takes a different history. I may read a lot more about Russia, and you might read a lot more about China. So going to have to learn from you, and you can show me some of the threat reports, and we can change the scores. When I was doing this for the threat research, I was pretending, I was I was doing the assessment by myself, right? So I was a team of one. So I replicated that depth of knowledge, just not based off my own, career experience. I've been doing this for a while, but I used, the APT groups and operations Google spreadsheet. If you're not aware of that, this is all written up on Medium. I have a blog on this, so you can go get those links there. Of course, MITRE attacks group pages. Put a dime in the jar for Katie. I said MITRE attack. And then, of course, Malpedia's actors page. If you haven't seen the Malpedia's actors page, those are an awesome resource. They're a cluster or galaxy or whatever for MISP. But there's a web page you can go and check them out. Look up the actor names and look up what existing reports are available for each one of those. So that was my depth of knowledge. That was how I replicated, having a big team to be able to do this research for the paper of these 3 organizations. And, just striking it, I think it's on, half the slides. Historical threat reporting is foundational, right? It's got to be tied back to historical reporting to defeat that if I was a bad guy approach. So applying the model, right, is really about reading a lot of reports, right? You gotta, if you're in CTI and you're not reading a lot, you're probably in the wrong career. I think we read, 3 or 4 times more than what we write. We have to read a lot and keep up on stuff. And Twitter, thank God, keeps us, mostly updated, pretty real time, it seems like. But you're gonna read a lot, and then you got to start thinking about how to pull that stuff out, right? You can do for example, here with American Oil threat assessment, right? We see FireEye's insights into Iranian cyber espionage report specifically talked about their desire to expand, its own petrochemical production and improve its competitiveness in the region. So it can indicate, at least a 4 for regional association, that this actor wants to be competitive where American Oil is operating in the Middle East. Also indicates, Iran targets based off of partnerships, which, American Oil, as we talked about earlier in their profile, they've got it with the Saudi government. So we put them squarely up there in the 5x5 block, the big scary red block in the upper right corner for both espionage, right? They looking for a competitive advantage going into those networks to see, where they're deploying, new technology next, or intellectual property they can compete with them. And then also some destructive attacks, right? We know Iran has done some destructive stuff in the Middle East before with Shamoon and a couple of other cases. So that's, how you kind of read through a threat report. You got the screenshot here from FireEye's open source report on the left, and translating it into, and that's just one report. One report obviously is not enough for a 5x5. One report, based off the scale is closer to, for capability documentation is closer to a 2. There is a lot more reports. This is just one example. All right, so here's a bigger shot of American Ammo's threat box. We already talked about why Iran's up there in the upper right. Iran's minister of our deputy oil minister previously had said that he wants the Iranian petrochemical companies to be easily ranked on the high list of world's largest petrochemical exporters. We know it's a strategy or a goal of their country. They've said it out loud that they want to be a lead competitor. That's why espionage is up there. We know it's a national goal for them to be a leader, and great way to be a leader in something against another country is go break into that country's network and see what they're thinking and what they're planning, right? Plus there's a bunch of other reporting. It's not just one assessment. United States government, financial organization. Again, this is an organization that doesn't exist, but allegedly they process all government payments to and from the private sector or public sector, depending on who needs to get paid. The USGFO touches that payment, they process it, they're holding PII. They're a big, American flag waving organization because they're part of the actual .gov space. Plus they're, technically a financial organization. So we can kind of do an assessment of who targets financial information, who targets, government information, who targets large data sets of PII. And we can get China up there in a 5x5 really quickly. We know that they're big on espionage. against the United States government in the past for PII, for general government espionage. We've got the OPM breach, we've got the Equifax breach. They went after the Anthem medical records and a whole bunch of other organizations for data sets. And here's this big, juicy government network full of financial information, PII, routing information. So we can easily put them up there, right? So interesting here with the ITCO's enterprise, decided to really kind of consider through the fact that as a corporation, they have a network, right? An enterprise network, but then they also have all these services. And the threat landscape for their services and their cloud environment may be completely different than their enterprise, threat box. And so we actually, just to show, I did 2 threat boxes to show if they had proper segmentation and had, essentially 2 separate networks or 2 well-segmented parts of their network, to say this is where all the services live in their network. And these are the threat actors that are going after them. You notice there's a lot more actors and a lot higher scores than the enterprise threat box. Now we can have a conversation about, I don't agree with these scores, and please do, beat me up on Twitter, beat me up on Medium. This is all out there. Happy to have the conversation, but really this is about applying the model. And one of the things I want to show is how flexible this model is, from an oil company to a government organization to 2 parts of the same organization. You can start to get specific. If you have an organization that works all around the world, you could do different regional ones. The threat actors that operate in South America may be different than the actors they got to worry about in Europe. So it's a very flexible model, and it's really up to the organization and how they deploy it and what they care about. And you see, here we only talked, at the nation state level, or Russian, flags and China flags. We kept it at the country level. One of the big reasons for us is, to me, this model is a really good way to communicate threats with your executives. This isn't about getting down to the analyst level and tracking every technique, using MITRE. It's attack framework, which I absolutely love. I think it's a great model, and I think it's a great way you build out playbooks and visibility into what threat actors do. I think that's huge, and I think that's got a lot of great impact. But when you go brief the board, and these are the same folks you have to explain what an indicator is, then we should probably make it more easily translated of what actual threats look like. Now, this isn't a risk model, and one of the things they're immediately going to say is, 5 by 5, that means, China's in my network now, or they're about to come in tomorrow. It's not necessarily, a likelihood assessment. It's not necessarily a risk assessment, right? It's a way to communicate about the threat actors that may be interested in your data sets and may be interested in your network at the executive level. We use this as a monthly briefing. It's just this single slide, right? Sometimes when you go to brief executives, all you get is that single slide. You can't talk about the 20 years of history that China has in, across 100 slides. It's just not going to work. You can write that report if you want to. Nobody's reading it. We get a single slide and we use it and we talk about their history. We don't talk about every group that's up there. Talk about, the new scores. If somebody adjusts, right, that's a talking point for that month. Obviously, you want to cover it a little more in depth the first couple of times you go through it, but maybe 6-7 months in, you're only touching, why the folks are still up in the upper right corner, what the organization's doing to counter those and get better detections and coverage. And then also we do a monthly read ahead for the briefer with any new stories that broke out this last month, right? So this month's obviously going to include, North Korea targeting researchers, and just 2 or 3 sentences with the link for the briefers. They can get smart and they can go talk at the executive level of the different types of targeting. One of the things this also helps do is, shows why that big flashy thing in the news isn't important. They're like, oh my God, North Korea is targeting researchers. And we go in, we're like, yeah, but we're an oil company and we don't do threat research. We don't have vulnerability researches. North Korea is still really low on us, right? And so it can help kind of lower the temperature on what should I be scared of. So again, ITCO submodel, discuss it real fast, I guess. We've got China up there in the 5 by 5 in the upper right. We know that they've gone after, cloud providers with the Cloud Hopper campaign. They've gone after, the managed service providers, gone after telecoms. That's definitely been an area that they've been interested in a long time. They've done a lot of intellectual property theft against companies, international companies, US companies, for data. And of course, going after the downrange targets, right? Kind of big word, supply chain attack, right? Going through that network to get to someone else's data. And of course, pushing the research further, got this wonderful slide, snippet from the SANS forensics 578 course, the CTI course that Katie actually teaches. A way to think about your existing threat models and how to kind of do some overlays and have some conversations. Now, this isn't something I would brief up maybe at the executive level, but this may be good director, manager level, depending on your organization's structure. But this is a good conversation to have with business units, right? And kind of show these are the things that your business unit processes, and these are some of the actors, and we can just borrow those icons from Threatbox and bring it on over. And we can have that conversation about the actors are targeting here and they're interested here. Here's some of the ways that they may target your organization. Did you know that China has no problem, putting people on the ground in the US and hiring people to actually go into organizations and steal data, right? And let's have a conversation with the insider threat team about those threats. If they're a 5x5, you should absolutely be having that conversation with your insider threat team and if you have a counterintelligence team, possible, human intelligence operations against your organization. It's a real thing, go out and look at all the DOJ indictments. I hear, someone has a big list of those on Medium as an article, running list, right? They've absolutely put people on the ground to enable cyber operations. So that's something to consider. And this is a good model, right, to overlay and have conversations with other business units. All right, so I know I talk a lot and I talk fast, so let's do a quick recap. Risk models, they don't account for the human intentions and capabilities. They don't talk about those human elements, and they don't stack, things like, or they don't consider things like, the changing times and what's happened in the last month, right? So talking about assessing those human models, those human elements in a model, Threatbox is that way. It's a great executive tool. Talk about who you should care about, who you should be talking about, who you should be defending against. It really fills this gap. It gives you a nice quantitative assessment model. It is data driven and target focused, right? My model does not apply to your model. So a 5x5 actor for me may be a 2x2 for you. And it's absolutely has to have good analysts with a whole depth of knowledge behind them, access to good threat reporting, and just building up that time in history. And again, your threat score is going to change as your analysts get smarter and read more reporting. As new reporting comes in, expect your threat box scores to change, month to month or every 6 months or so as new things come out. I would like them to never change because the actors never change, but unfortunately, that's not how the battlefield shapes up. So, and that's all I have for Threatbox. Like I said, it's up on Medium. If you find Killer Grizz on Medium, I'm on there. I did a write-up on this. My white paper is on the SANS website for those that love reading 20+ pages of academic white papers. This was originally what it was all from, but I tried to do a TLDR for you. And I think Katie and I are going to nerd out on some threat modeling now.
Oh yeah. So we have a bunch of questions already coming in. So we'll see how many questions we can get to. I'll also try as we're talking to pull up, or Andy, if you have a link handy to your Medium blog and your white paper, we can drop those in. I'll also add those to the slides, which yes, this presentation will be available after. The slides will be available. The recording will be available from the page you joined it from. So I don't even know where to start. I have literally like Post-it notes of like thoughts that I was writing down. But here's a really good question. And I think it gets into a lot of aspects of this and the challenge. Cobalt Strike. So thinking about novelty, custom development, and like how you think about sophistication, how would you handle something like Cobalt Strike that's used by both ransomware operators, nation state, state-sponsored adversaries? And then I guess a related question would be, do you feel like Threatbox could be used at like a malware Cobalt Strike level, or is it really meant to be humans? So what do you think about Cobalt Strike, Andy?
So great question. We actually had this debate internally. One of the challenges we'd had was a customer had asked if we could add malware, and we're like, well, it doesn't work the same, right? It's not a human element. Really wanted that one to be human focused. I think malware fits in your existing risk models. And if it doesn't, we can have a good conversation about, building a better model for malware level. But there is no intention between malware. Malware's, just like a gun. A gun doesn't do anything. Malware doesn't do anything without some human behind it, right? But I do think I apologize to Colin. I didn't capture his last name, but he talked at the SANS CTI Summit last week. He had some really good modeling, a couple of different examples. One of them actually had some scores of different malware with intentions and capabilities, and a couple other categories. And I've written it down as a note to nerd out on later and see if it's actually another layer we can kind of add to Threatbox, because I do think understanding, malware and is important. But I think it also depends on your organization, right? Does your red team or penetration testing team use Cobalt Strike? Sure, then hopefully you have application whitelisting and they're the only ones, running that thing. But the reality is, whether it's malware or any type of software that gives you remote administrative control, you need to have some security in depth to be able to control that type of thing. And so that really depends on the organization. Cobalt Strike may be a -2 modifier for you because you've got really good detections deployed in your environment. You've got an IDS, you've got endpoints, you've got Sigma, and you're doing all the right things. Or you could be a really, immature organization and you're like, I got a blinky box. Then you probably don't get that -2 modifier because you have no idea what the blinky box is doing, right? So it's an honest assessment and it's internal. And that's why, you'll never see someone's threat box probably publicly, because it might be showing, the emperor's new clothes kind of a situation.
This stuff is sensitive, right? The way that we make assessments about adversaries is sensitive. So that makes sense. We had a question coming in on how you could tie threat box into maybe risk models. So someone asking specifically about one that I wasn't familiar with, cyber threat modeling risk assessment, C-FMEA. But I would take this question as overall, you talked about how this is different than risk, right? How do you think threat box could be complementary to like risk assessment methodologies? How would that work?
So I think, if I was in charge of if I was CISO for a day kind of a thing, I would definitely have my briefing cover, right? The risk model, what our current risk register is, and risk projects, right? And immediately after or before do the threat box briefing. And really the threat box briefing should be driving towards actual coverage, right? You don't want to just talk about who's targeting you. You should start talking about some of those lower level things like actor playbooks for those actors. What is our visibility into those actor playbooks? And we can tie those into the risk model and say, hey, this risk score may only be, number 5 on the item list, and we should really worry about 1 through 4. But number 5, actually, the threat team rated as a 5x5. One of the actors is doing this. They're really, really worried about it, and we don't have that good a detection. So even though it's a 4 compared to the other 3, we think we need to do some, prioritize some projects on it. So.
Gotcha. One question that came in, and I think I had a similar one. The examples that you gave were all state sponsored, right? Because that's similar. It's easy for explaining. But could you incorporate Finns, financially motivated, patriot hackers, anonymous, that kind of thing? Would that work with Threatbox? And what are your thoughts about incorporating non-state sponsored actors?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, it truly is supposed to be an executive model, right? And so it really depends up to your organization. If I say APT 29 and that makes your board, bored, then that's not helpful. So we're just going to call them Russia. But we've definitely done I think it was 2019 when ransomware with Doppelpaymer and all that stuff there was a lot of reporting, and our leadership was hearing about it. And when they start hearing about it on CNN kind of a thing, we'll definitely put it on Threatbox. We have a kind of general rule: if an actor group isn't above like a 3x3 or a 4x4, then they may be on while they're relevant, and then they'll fall off. And we keep track, right? We have a big running spreadsheet, but we can get down to the individual actor level. You can get down to the individual campaign level if you have some type of attribution. Obviously, it's really hard to assess intent and capability over time if it's a brand new group. So there are obviously some limitations, but yeah, you can get all the way down to the UNCs even if you want to. It's just a matter of whether or not you would brief that to your board. I think it would depend on your organization. FireEye board probably gets that. Some other corporate board probably not. So I hate to give you the default InfoSec answer. Depends.
That's a CTI answer, Andy. Let's claim that, right? So related to that, a question that came in that I was wondering about as well. I imagine as you've applied this, it can get really complex. How many actors do you feel like you could incorporate, or how would you handle that if you had, there are hundreds, if not thousands of groups, or depending on how you categorize them, how do you handle that? What would you recommend for handling a lot of actors?
So that's one of the reasons we did the spreadsheet tracking instead of the PowerPoint, and we make a hard rule of like only 4x4 and above, or only nation state, unless it's current times relevant, right? There's new reporting going on, or there's active reporting going on, and that was to keep the visual clean. You can absolutely have the running spreadsheet, thousands of actors. The other thing too is, not trying to. It's a graphic topic, talking point. Like it's the slide that holds the attention while you talk, right? And so you could have 1,000 more actors, in your spreadsheet, but do we want to talk about the guys who haven't had reporting since 2018? That's probably not relevant to the conversation. And then also from a defender, before I piss off Twitter, attribution absolutely matters. Takedowns absolutely matter. But if I'm a defender organization, right, I've got no takedown capability, I've got no reaction capability. Do I care that it's APT 28 or 29? Probably not. I care that the Russian government is interested in the data in my organization. At the executive level, they don't care that it's GRU, SVR, or any of the other acronyms they've never even heard of. They care that the Russian government's interested in their network. So it depends on who you're briefing, right? It depends on their education level, the type of organization. And it's all about, does it matter? If they're interested, yeah, hopefully you've got smart people in the room that can talk about that kind of stuff and get down into it and show how smart you are on, what specific units are doing these days. But ultimately it's a tool to inform other folks on what we do care about, right? And you can talk about those projects that we're doing. We can talk about attack. And you can talk about a lot of other things. So yeah, I don't know, probably rambling now. It depends.
No, you're good. You had to bring attribution into it. No,
it absolutely matters, but I can't put APT 29 in a signature. That's not helping me a whole lot. So
it depends on when it matters. Well, we'll have to do a whole webcast on attribution sometime and just have people argue. But one thing that I wanted to emphasize that really struck me about this was we can discount, the idea of simplifying things to this level. And I often do it as well because I'm like, well, what actors matter most? Well, it depends on the moment of the day. But as any kind of analysts who are looking at threats, we have to have a way to communicate with executives, right? And so what I love about this is kind of what you said of maybe we only put the ones that are 4x4 and above, we communicate those to executives. But then for everything that you display, you have backup for that. And I love it as sort of a conversation starter, right? So if they look at your threat box and they're like, why aren't the North Korean actors that hacked security researchers? Like the example you gave, I love it as a conversation starter. And so I think, I'm imagining how to implement this is, you have the visual, but then you have your spreadsheet. Maybe it's in Excel, for example, maybe not, a database, something, maybe you use a threat intelligence platform where you kind of track these individual scores. And I would say the justification for the scores, because, even arguing, is this a 4 or a 3? I can imagine that could be a multi-day argument between teams. So is that kind of what you've done? Do you, it sounds like you, in a spreadsheet, you kind of track all the details behind it so you can have that if you need it. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So we have, in our spreadsheet, we have obviously the actor names, the countries they're associated with, and the scores we've given them. And then there's a notes section. It's also actually included in the bottom of the slides, and in our real deck, we've included that. So the briefer has why the scores are what they are. And then they also get any current news from the last 30 days, or since the last time they briefed the threat box, they've got any current news for each of those actors. And so we track all that in a spreadsheet. You can sort and stack it, right? If you want to go in and have a Russia brief, just talk about Russia for a month, or just North Korea for a month, you could break out just those actor scores and talk at a lower level and talk about the individual groups, and talk about the individual group scores for different categories, right? You have some actors for certain countries they do destructive. That's their thing. You've got other ones that are the espionage guys, right? And so you can get down to that level. And so I would say, as we're talking about taking folks on and off the chart, I would always keep the big nation states on there, the big 4, right? Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. I would always keep them on there, even if they're a 1x1 for us, because of the executive question, where the heck are they, right? But, non-nation state actors, or the folks you don't hear about regularly, definitely I would roll them off depending on if it's current event or not. And the other thing too is with, nation state actors, they're long-term. In America, I love us, super patriot, but we're pretty short-term in our memory. We've had the conversation.
I have no idea what you mean, Andy. I have no idea. I don't remember what I had for breakfast.
Right. We've had the conversation though, like, well, there's no new reporting from China in 3 months. Should we lower their score? Like, bro, they've got a 5-year plan for their threats. Like, not 90 days. Like, they're not on a fiscal budget or something. They're talking about what they're breaching 2 years from now. No, you don't lower the score for espionage for a country that does it, since they're like 3rd grade. Like, that's what they're teaching these kids. Like, you don't lower the score just because there's nothing sexy coming up, right? That's one of the things I hate about CTI with the way it's received is we focus on when things are reported, not really when they were happening. You talk about an actor who's got a dwell time of 18 months. Sure, there's no reporting, but guess what? What they're doing today, we're going to hear about later.
It's a great point. That's actually one thing that I thought of as a challenge of this. You said, and this is something that I believe as well, like focus on what adversaries have actually done. How do you balance that with like what I call anticipatory intelligence, right? Like something like Solarwinds, for example. Like, I don't think that would have, that was not on my radar as a thing that was likely to happen. But how do you balance and considering what you just said about the fact that reporting is often based on what happened in the past, like, how do you think about that as a limitation? How do you handle the fact that maybe we aren't getting everything? What are your thoughts there?
I like whiteboard what if brainstorming. I think it's a critical part for analysts, right? We have a lot of different models that we do for analysis, right? Red team analysis, not the hacker red teams, but traditional intelligence folks. Those type of assessments, the what if assessments, I think they really, really are important for threat modeling. I just think that they're a different product. And understanding, right? And this is one of the things we always have to deal with, as you inform upward to management, we have a product line for that. It's a different product line, right? You don't like, well, where's this product? It's a separate thing. We don't have to put everything into the same bucket, right? This is what we know, and this is how we compare these actors to each other. And we want to have a what if and true threat modeling of what could go wrong in our environment, right? And I'll tell you a little backstory about me. Where I learned threat modeling was not in the cybers. I was in the Army a long time ago, it seems like now. But in 2004, I was driving around Baghdad and I was a driver. And my squad leader, we were just responsible for patrolling an area, had a couple of Iraqi police stations we worked with. And so we'd go out and we'd have to learn our area. And so he'd pull up the map. He was my team lead, right? He would sit in the seat next to me and I was driving and he'd say, stay within these big boundaries of roads, these what we call MSRs, major supply routes, but drive throughout the city and get me lost. And when I get lost, I'll tell you, get back to a main road so I can find myself on the map. I just want to learn this city. And so as I was driving around and he was learning the map and what the actual streets looked like on the map, he would say, all right, if somebody started shooting at us from that building, what would we do? And we would just drill that mentally all of the time, right? And that's a great threat model. If I don't know if Solarwinds did anything negligent, I'm not saying that, but I don't necessarily blame Solarwinds for being compromised. They were holding like 80% of the Fortune 500 companies are using their software. They weren't really the target. They were just the road to get through to get to the true targets, right? And if everybody migrates to another company, they're going to be the next target, right? And your telecoms, huge target because everybody goes across telecoms. So I think it's important as you're doing those threat modelings and those what if scenarios. One, don't blame the victim unless there was negligence. Yeah, sure, sue them and blame them, but start thinking through those. It's not just that software. It's your whatever trusted business partner connections you have. Do you have, is your incident management system in the cloud? Is your tip in the cloud? Right? I think, was it FireEye reporting about SolarWinds or was it Microsoft? So they said, I think it was a FireEye that they were going after, they were targeting the threat team or the InfoSec teams when they were getting inside of networks and looking for IT diagrams. Where are your IT diagrams saved, right? That's a lot of really good what if threat modeling like SolarWinds that organizations absolutely have to have. And you have to have those conversations. Different product line. Long way of saying different
separating like the threats that are likely to happen or happening now versus the what ifs.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah, dinosaurs could come crush your network. More than likely, you probably have, people trying to put point of sale malware on if you're running a bunch of point of sale. I missed your talk yesterday at RSAC, but I saw some of the slides being shared out. It's the classic, you're more likely to die from a cow than a shark situation, but the shark's sexier to worry about, right?
I'm going to have to steal that metaphor, cow versus shark. I
think
actually didn't know that.
It's in GSEC slides. It's in your GSEC slides from SANS.
More likely to die from a cow. I'm going to have to fact check you on that one, but I believe it.
You're fact checking SANS. I'm just saying.
So one question that came in, and this is fair, like we're getting super deep here. What about for like less mature CTI teams? So someone asking like, is there a level where you feel like a CTI team should be doing some basic things before they start using Threatbox and as a methodology? Or do you feel like how would people get started? Because it can seem kind of intimidating, thousands of adversaries. Like, could you say anything about should someone wait until their team's mature? How would they get started with this?
That's a great question. So I actually have a talk submitted to RSAC that got accepted as an alternate. And it's kind of the Goldilocks of CTI programs. What do I really need? And and the whole idea is to talk a lot about requirements without using that dirty requirements word, because I think we talk about it too much. But the reality is, right, do I need Threatbox? Do I need a dark web program? Do I need malware analyst? Do I need to do infrastructure analysis? Right? If I'm a defender organization, like I love what Joe, I probably remember his last name, Slowick does. I've always thought his infrastructure analysis is awesome and it's great for the community, but I probably don't need to do that myself and replicate that capability inside my shop, right? Unless I'm getting paid to do threat research. It doesn't really help defend if that actor that I just found all their infrastructure never ever targets me. So I say, it depends on your business model, depends on your organization. I think with Threatbox, I think that this is something you could do minimum of 2 analysts. One analyst, you just have too much bias in. And it's a lot of reading about a lot of actors. But 2 analysts plus, absolutely, I think any organization should be able to say, I think from based off of history, these guys may, be interested in our type of network.
Yeah, and that's something that I believe as well. And I say the same kind of thing when people are like, threat modeling is scary. Like I have to think about every possible threat, whether you're, assessing threats or modeling them, like start somewhere, right? Because like maybe you don't have your massive spreadsheet with 1,000 adversaries today, but if you start with 3 or 5, or, one that your executive asks you about, or one that you've seen last month, that's a starting point, right? So I would absolutely agree. Like start somewhere. You're not going to have everything now, but I think sort of people, and I do this too, like they let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Like start somewhere, just start with something. So,
and you also, I think you have to think about, how do I bring this information to the teams that do things? CTI team, I'm not writing signatures in my organization. Some do, right? But that's not my core responsibility, right? I can pass them over. So how do I work with the signature folks, right? The IDS folks or the risk folks to prioritize projects, right? I can complain all day long that you should implement MFA and here's all the reasons why in products that nobody reads, but am I engaging them in a language they understand, getting it into the risk model, right? And getting it into the risk briefing and getting it in front of management. Like how many people know like the critical controls, the CIS controls are actually based off of intelligence in previous incidents. People just think that that's a cute list of 20 recommendations, but those are proven to help with incident response and they're proven to stop activity, right? And I don't think most InfoSec leaders, let alone IT managers, know that that's actually based off of history. And that's where CTI has failed. We informed them in the sense that they made some really rad controls, but we failed to tie threat. I would rather see threat reporting aligned to the critical controls than aligned to MITRE ATT&CK any day.
Ooh,
no offense.
I don't know if I thought about that. No, that's interesting. Huh.
Is it more important to say that control number 3 or whatever would have stopped this actor than this is what the actor did on a playbook, on a heat map?
Yeah, I think my challenge with controls, and we're totally getting off topic, but that's okay. My challenge with controls is it depends how you implement it so much, but I'm gonna have to mull that one over. And I like that idea of like CIS controls and threat actors. So that's probably a topic for another day though.
Yeah.
So
it all depends on audience though, right?
What's that?
Depends on audience. Who are you sharing the intelligence with? If you're trying to get your organization to change, then you have to tie it to language that they understand. Risk, controls, projects that they can actually do.
I love that. I always talk about know your consumers as a threat intel team, like talk in their language. So a kind of question that came in, and I'm wondering if this would be possible. What do you think about industry specific threat boxes? Like, could you create one for like healthcare, or do you think it's it's very organization specific. What are your thoughts there? Like it'd be cool for like an ISAC to like share one. What do you think?
Yeah, so you could do it up to, so for intent is sectors 3. I should know my scores by my memory. So you could do, capability score for all the actors, and you could do the intent scale up to 3. And then each individual organization have to consider, I may be in the ISAC in the Midwest and, maybe less of a target than the, someone that's in the Middle East, right? So you start talking about the actual intent score of 4 and 5. That will definitely depend on where you sit in the industry. But you could easily do some baselining, yeah.
So one question that I have, and I face this challenge myself, and I kind of alluded to it. Like I always like to answer, it depends. So what are your thoughts on the limitations or challenges of giving things a score? Like why do you feel like that's compelling? And like, what are the limitations of that? If I say something's a 4 versus a 3 and we debate about it, like, what do you think about that conceptually of giving something a score when numbers, right, are limited and there might be a lot, like we talked about, behind that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I keep referring to threats as like China as a 5x5 threat, and I'm trying to go away from that because I want to show that they're a critical threat. They're up in the red zone, but I actually want to step away from the numbers. I think quantifying is important for the math behind the scenes, but I think as soon as you mention it to your audience, even after you've shown them the definitions, why is it a 5, not a 4, right? If I can just say they're in the red zone or a critical threat or tie some assessment language to those scores like critical or substantial or moderate, then there's a little bit more gray area and we don't have to debate about it. But within the team, yeah, the debating is fun. If you're on a good team, right? Arguing with people is fun as long as you again, stay friendly and go get coffee afterwards. But in my language in presenting it, I'm trying to get away from using that score because I do think it is kind of a mental roadblock where people stop and want to think about the score more than the model. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier when I was presenting the model is like, we can argue about the score, but I want you to pay attention to the methodology, right? Learn the methodology and implement it. Completely use your different scores. I don't care, but think about how you can implement it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's something, when I talk to people about making, assessments of likelihood or probability, using percentages for that kind of thing, like don't get hung up on the number itself, but like 5 is more than 4.
Right.
And so I think that there's value in, even if numbers are imperfect, which they are, right? Trying to fit you can't put adversaries in a box. No, but like knowing that like this is roughly higher than this, like I think there's value in that. So
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
that I personally like debate over because I want to say it depends, but you got to make decisions at some point. So if you don't decide, if you don't have any methodology, you're just kind of flailing. So having, I think, some kind of numbers, even if imperfect, definitely help with that racking and stacking.
Yeah, pulling back the curtain a little more. When we originally went through the model, we were talking about a 10-point scale, and I was like, okay, well, what's each level? And then people are like, well, someone could be an 8 or a 9, so having a 10-point is more broad than having a 4 or 5. And I was like, but I want a measurement, a definition for each one of those scores. Like even though we can argue what the definition is, or whether or not it fits that definition, I think if you have a gradient scale, it's a lot more difficult to say it's an 84 or an 85. And that bothers me in the way that I think for some reason. I would much rather be like, this is the definition. Do you meet that criteria? No? Okay, then you're 1 score below that, right?
Awesome. Well, we are getting close on time. I can't believe it. I'm so glad we had time to chat. But if anyone has other questions, feel free. I'll just flip back. This is Andy's Twitter handle, KLRGRZ. And then I'm at Like the Coins on Twitter. You can also find us both on LinkedIn. So if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us on social media and we're happy to kind of keep the discussion going. We can have Twitter discussions on this for days. So with that, I'm going to start to wrap things up. Action items, right? The point of this is that you go apply what we talked about today. So think about, could you use Threatbox? Could you use some kind of assessment methodology? Like maybe it's not Threatbox, but maybe you have an idea for how you could take that idea. And, as we talked about at the end, remember the limitations of any kind of methodology you use like this. But I think the whole point is we have to get a handle on all these different threats that we're facing. And so this is one way you could do that. So think about how that could apply to your organization. That's your action item go do. And then these slides will be posted afterwards. References, I'd recommend go back and read all of these things later. And with that, I think we are right about at noon Eastern. So thank you all so much for coming. Andy, thank you so much for joining.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure. Love nerding out with you over this stuff. And again, you can find the slides and the recording posted later. With that, thank you all so much. Stay safe, and we hope to see you next month. Bye, all.